Being a businessman and a deeply spiritual person often feels like I'm walking a tightrope, balancing two worlds that seem at odds with each other. On one hand, I'm constantly immersed in the fast-paced, results-driven world of business, focused on profit margins, growth, market share, and competition. I deal with financial reports, strategy meetings, and the demands of stakeholders, all while trying to steer my company through the complex waters of the modern business environment. But on the other hand, there's a deep, unshakable part of me that feels the pull of spirituality. Something beyond the material, beyond the hustle. There's a longing for inner peace, for connection to something larger than myself, for a life that's more about service than success. And this creates a tension, a quiet inner conflict that I carry with me every day. In business, there's an almost unspoken pressure to be hard, to be a decision-maker who is not swayed by emotions or moral dilemmas. You're expected to think with your head, not your heart. But I'm someone who believes deeply in kindness, in compassion, in living a life of integrity, and those beliefs often feel out of place in a world that prioritizes profits over people. When I walk into a meeting or sit down to negotiate a deal, I sometimes feel like I'm stepping into a different persona, one that can make tough choices, one that can separate personal values from professional needs. There are times when I look at a potential deal or partnership and wonder if it's worth pursuing, not just for the money it could generate, but for the impact it might have on people's lives. I've walked away from lucrative deals that didn't sit right with me, and each time I've questioned if I made the right decision. Did I sacrifice financial growth for some higher ideal, or was I simply too idealistic to see the bigger picture? That's one of the hardest things about being a spiritual businessman. You're constantly questioning the value of what you're doing. I have to ask myself, am I serving others, or am I just serving myself? Because if I'm being honest, a lot of the time, I'm serving my own ego, whether it's chasing prestige, approval, or even the simple satisfaction of seeing the numbers climb. The business world can become so intoxicating that I forget why I started in the first place. It's not about winning or losing. It's about adding value, building something meaningful, something that makes a difference. But when the day-to-day grind takes over, it's easy to lose sight of that. The other side of this struggle is the guilt that I feel when I'm not spiritual enough. I've had times where I've worked so many hours, dealt with so many urgent issues that I've skipped my meditation, neglected my morning rituals, or even pushed aside time for reflection. It's hard to find that sense of stillness when there's so much noise, so many things demanding attention. And when I do make time for my spiritual practices, I can't help but feel a nagging sense of guilt, like I'm somehow being irresponsible. I feel the weight of my business responsibilities pulling at me, reminding me that there are people depending on me, that my company has goals and expectations to meet. Sometimes it's like I'm being torn in two directions. On one side, I'm being pulled toward spiritual practices that help me reconnect with myself and my purpose, my meditation, my reading, my prayer. But on the other side, there's the drive to succeed, to grow my business, to meet my financial obligations. At the core of it, there's a feeling that I'm not doing either one well enough. When I'm focused on business, I feel disconnected from my spirituality. When I'm focused on my spirituality, I feel guilty for neglecting the practical side of my life. There's this constant tension between wanting to be a successful, driven entrepreneur and wanting to live a life that's aligned with my deeper values. One of the hardest moments is when I feel disconnected from both worlds. There are days when the pressures of business feel overwhelming, when I'm faced with a tough decision that demands all my attention and focus, and my spiritual practices feel like an afterthought. And then, there are other days when I feel so spiritually drained that the business side of things feels suffocating. There's a sense of dissonance, of being torn between two identities. It's easy to feel like I'm failing in both areas, like I'm not achieving the spiritual growth I aspire to, and at the same time, like I'm not reaching my full potential as a businessman. It's lonely in that place. You can feel like an outsider in both worlds, like you're not living up to the expectations of the people who surround you, whether they're fellow entrepreneurs or fellow spiritual seekers. But despite all the inner conflict and self-doubt, I've learned something important over the years. There is no perfect balance. There is no clear-cut way to make these two parts of my life fit neatly together. Business and spirituality don't always align, and that's okay. I've come to realize that the struggle itself is part of the journey. The tension between these two worlds doesn't have to be something that breaks me. It can be something that shapes me. There are times when I've made decisions in my business that felt inauthentic, and there are times when I've prioritized my spiritual practices to the detriment of my professional responsibilities. But with each misstep, I've learned something valuable. I've learned how to incorporate my spiritual values into my professional life in small ways, whether it's through how I treat my employees, how I approach leadership, or how I make decisions. I've learned that being a good businessman doesn't mean abandoning my spiritual side. It means finding ways to bring my full self into every situation. It means that even in the face of competition, I can still act with integrity. It means finding ways to lead with empathy and compassion, and doing my best to make decisions that benefit not just my business, but the people around me as well. Sometimes the grace comes not in grand moments of epiphany, but in the small choices I make every day. It's in the decision to treat someone with respect, even when they don't deserve it. It's in the times when I choose to listen, when I take the time to slow down and connect with others. It's in the quiet moments of reflection, when I realize that the success of my business isn't just measured by profits, but by the impact I have on the lives of the people I touch. I'm also learning that my spiritual practices don't have to be something separate from my work. They can inform the way I approach business, the way I interact with others, and the way I handle challenges. Meditation doesn't just help me find peace in my personal life. It helps me clear my mind and make better decisions. My moments of stillness can help me connect to my intuition and guide me through moments of uncertainty. I'm learning to be more present, not just with myself, but with the people I work with, the clients I serve, and the employees I lead. This integration of business and spirituality doesn't happen overnight. It's a messy, sometimes uncomfortable process. There are days when it feels like I'm losing ground in both areas, and there are moments when I feel like I'm failing to live up to my own standards. But then there are moments, fleeting, but real, when I feel a sense of peace and alignment, when I see how the two worlds can coexist. I'm starting to believe that I don't need to be perfect. I don't need to have it all figured out. I just need to keep showing up, keep trying, and keep trusting that the work I do, both in business and in spirituality, matters. The key, I've come to realize, is not about finding an ideal balance, but about being willing to walk the line between these two worlds with grace. It's about embracing the messiness of the journey, accepting that sometimes I'll get it wrong, but knowing that each step, no matter how imperfect, is part of my growth. It's in the trying, in the striving, that I find my path. And in the end, I think that's the greatest success of all. Learning how to live a life that's not just about achievement, but about being true to who I am, both as a businessman and as a spiritual being.